Hey, today we're going to look at James chapter 5, verses 7 to 11. So grab that, have a read, and come back. So we've got a bit of a shorter passage today, but it's a good one for our present situation. Why? Because, it's about suffering. The reminder in verse 10 is that we need to be patient in the face of suffering. Or at the start there, we see that we need to be patient, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See, it's when you're suffering, isn't it, that you can't wait for justice. In other words, you can't wait for things to be put right, which as a Christian means you're waiting, you're longing for Christ's return, because that is when those things will happen. James goes on then to use a few illustrations to make his point. First, a farmer waiting for the crop. And we see that in verses 7 to 9. But be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. So the image is of a farmer waiting for their crop, waiting for the rains that will make them grow. I've lived in rural areas enough to know that this waiting can be pretty stressful. And the waiting can sometimes be in vain, as in the rains never come. Or ironically, so much rain comes that it wipes out the crops in a flood. Living in the bush, it was easy to spot the Christian farmers from those who weren't. As a general rule, and of course there were exceptions, the Christian farmers were the ones who trusted God with their crops, the ones who waited patiently, and nothing could really move them. Because, why? They knew that God is good and will ultimately look after them. James's point here is that we should be like that in suffering, patiently waiting for the Lord to make everything right, because we know that he'll come good on his promises, and his promises here to end suffering, to make everything right. Then he gives us a second illustration after that in verses 10 and 11. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we counted as blessed those who have persevered. The prophets, many of them in the Old Testament, who spoke in the name of the Lord, they're known for their perseverance. These guys had to put up with all kinds of trouble just for speaking the truth, but they stuck with it and they wouldn't change their mind just to make their lives easier. And that's what we're called to do here too, to stick with it, even if we're ridiculed, even if we're persecuted. And then lastly, there's a third one in the end of verse 11 there. You've heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Job is used as an example. This is a guy who had everything taken from him, and I do mean everything, yet he didn't budge in saying that God would show him to be right in the end. And that's exactly what happened. So, for us, I don't know if you really feel like you're suffering at the moment. I don't know if that's quite the right word. Maybe it is. I do know that as this isolation drags on more and more, you're more likely to suffer in some kind of way. Whether it be the loss of your job, whether it be a mental health issue, whether it be your physical health. Now, your suffering may not be as severe as Job or the prophets, but they can still be our example. That is, the prophets and Job can still be our example. Our example to wait patiently for God, trusting in his promises, waiting for the day, not the day when the coronavirus isolation will end, as good as that will be, but the day when Christ will make everything right and end all the suffering and all the persecution once and for all. The message here is pretty simple. Stick with Jesus through the suffering, because it will be worth it in the end.